This conference will now be recorded.
And I think, am I right before lunch? So y'all be. Yeah. Yeah. Anytime, anytime. Nobody there, right?
No, I haven't. Into the rainforest.
Well, I thought him would have, he did, but he had drawn all over it. The crayon drawing.
I actually think I already have one. I've seen it before.
Anybody right here? No. Okay. That's fine. There was another handout out on the table out there. Hopefully everybody got. It's got the little DHS logo on it. Kind of looks like a, well, kind of almost a letter. It says HCBS final rule. In your stack of stuff.
Say it's up there.
Yeah, there's one or two still out there. Did everybody find it? Okay. Yeah, almost the last one. I'm leaving my jacket. Oh. Oh, yeah, well, I'll give you, remind me, you can have this one. I didn't bring one. I didn't get one. Okay.
You grabbed one yesterday.
Yeah, he can't, because I'll ask him because I'm not gonna talk about it till the end.
Okay, thank you.
All righty, we'll get started. What time am I supposed to end? Tell me.
10:30.
Okay. I'm Michaela Bishop. I'm with the Oklahoma Department of Human Services, Developmental Disability Services Division. And I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to talk primarily about our community programs, but I'm going to tie it in as well to the ICF IID program. To give you an idea of my experience, I have worked for DHS, it'll be 39 years this year, all with developmental disabilities. I started at what used to be the Pauls Valley State School. And so I've got experience working in a facility. And then when I left there, I've had, some different journeys, but I also at one point did internal monitoring of those facilities for DHS, because DHS used to operate the 3 largest institutions in the state. And I would go to those and do kind of a survey against the Title 19 standards to see how they were doing and all that kind of stuff. So I have experience with the standards that those facilities operate under as well. I will get started here. We're gonna, the first part of this, I'm gonna talk a little bit about history. It's kind of, some of it's kind of interesting to me. I don't know if you're a big history buff, but I'm gonna kind of tie in what was happening nationally and what was happening in Oklahoma kind of at the same time. So if, where were we in Oklahoma at the time this national initiative came about, that kind of stuff, just so you get a feel for it. The first institutions were built in the 1850s. In 1909, the Oklahoma legislature designated funding for our first institution. So a little bit later, but then Oklahoma's kind of a younger state compared to some. I love the names too. The Oklahoma Institution for the Feeble-Minded. which was created in Enid. And then several years later, it was renamed the Enid State School. And that building is still there. I don't know, is anybody from Enid or the Enid area? Okay, you're probably familiar with it. We call this the White House. That's what we always called it. Then in 1907, the training school for white boys, I always heard wayward white boys because they were, delinquent, was established in Pauls Valley and later converted to the Pauls Valley Hospital for Epileptics. And then in 1953 became the Pauls Valley State School, which is where I went to work. Not in 1953 though. And this is what it looked like. I've never seen, these buildings are all gone, but this was the original Pauls Valley State School. In 1992, the state schools changed their names to the Northern Oklahoma Resource Center and the Southern Oklahoma Resource Center. They did that because, well, for one thing, anybody who had been a child at those facilities had pretty much grown up. So they weren't schools anymore. But also it was our hope that they would be resource centers because you had a lot of professionals and different people there, hoping that they could provide some consultation with folks in the community, help families out, that kind of thing. So those institutions came into being, and that was the main service we had really in Oklahoma. Each one of those places in their heyday housed over 500 people each, because there just weren't other services, and if families couldn't take care of their family member with an intellectual disability, that's where they took them, and that's where doctors recommended they take them. Put them there where you have experts and they'll be so well taken care of, and don't worry about them anymore. Now, some parents kept their kids at home and banded together to form their own kind of little schools and things, because in the early days, kids with disabilities weren't required to go to school. We didn't have school programs for them. One of the first schools in Oklahoma was the Dale Rogers School, founded in 1953. Does anybody know who Dale Rogers was? A few of us old people.
Dale Evans, probably, right?
Huh?
Dale Evans.
Yep, Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. They were TV stars. He was a cowboy. They did a Western show and they sang and all this kind of stuff. I used to watch the Dale Roy Rogers show. And their school started because they had a child with disability. They had a child with Down syndrome, and she also had heart problems. And Dale Evans wrote a book about it. It was kind of popular at the time. So they had a real interest in that. And their child died young. Okay, so then nationally in '61, President Kennedy created the President's Panel on Mental Retardation. Anybody know why President Kennedy was so interested in it? Yeah, he had a sister, Rosemary Kennedy. Now, Rosemary, she had a somewhat mild intellectual disability, and they had put her through all the same, things that the upper class used to put their kids through, like charm school and what have you. So she, passed through, was a debutante, all that good kind of stuff. Toward the end of her life, she started having a lot of problems, a lot of mental health issues. Was becoming more like aggressive and angry and all kinds of stuff. And her father, Joseph Kennedy, he had always kind of kept, the whole family had kind of kept her disability a secret. Kind of passed her off as just like everybody else. But when she started having all those problems, that was becoming a problem for the family. And he'd heard about this great new treatment called, lobotomy. And so basically, she had a lobotomy where, they mess with part of the brain that's supposed to stop aggressive behavior and various kinds of things. And, it was pretty experimental. It didn't do her much good. So she ended up in an institution herself. not functioning well at all after that time. But the other Kennedys, having grown up with her and having supported her and, helped her, I mean, they would step in, her brothers and sisters, and help her. There were a lot of them. So they all got involved with disability issues. And that's where, Special Olympics were started through the Kennedys as well. Okay, so we had 2 state schools, and then in 1964, the Hissa Memorial Center in Sand Springs was completed. It was considered state of the art at the time. Way newer than the other facilities, again, which were built in 1909 and around that time. And the Hissa Memorial Center, it also had about 500 people. And it looked, to me, it looked like kind of like a grade school, to tell you the truth. It was all one story, and the buildings all had kind of external entrances. If you've seen those grade schools where the kids go down and enter their classrooms from outside. By 1971, the federal Medicaid program had established standards of care for institutions, which they named at that time ICFMR, Intermediate Care Facilities for the Mentally Retarded. That's when the Title 19 regulations really came into play that are still in use today. Then in 1975, Congress passed Public Law 94-142, the Education of All Handicapped Children Act, which stated that all children with disabilities have the right to a free and appropriate education. And that law is still in effect too. What becomes kind of interesting sometimes is how free and appropriate is interpreted. Because I don't want to bash education, but disabilities is not always their main focus. And so an appropriate education for you might be in a classroom at school, but for you, you cause a lot of problems. An appropriate education for you is to be at home, homeschool, and a homeschool teacher come in a couple of hours a week, So, it really differs. There really is a lot more that needs to be done in education for folks with disabilities, I would say. Here's a classroom. I can't remember what year this was. This is Whittier School.
1957.
Did you read? Oh, can you read?
57, yeah.
You guys have better eyes than me. Yeah, 1957. This is Dale Rogers. It was first called the Dale Rogers School. So there's a class for kiddos with disabilities. Now, the one thing about having classrooms, this is a segregated classroom, not an integrated classroom with other kids. Because the one issue you can have, it's way better than what was happening before, which was nothing. But kids with disabilities are just learning from other kids with disabilities. They're not learning from typical peers. They're not learning what music they listen to, what clothes they wear, what lingo they use when they talk, or just how to interact, as teenagers and kids do. But definitely a step up from where things were. But that's a pretty large class. Now, the first efforts by the Oklahoma Department of Public Welfare, which is what DHS used to be called, to develop services outside the institutions, resulted in the formation of sheltered workshops. So, there was nothing for adults and kids with disabilities before this other than to go and live in an ICF, one of the big ICFs or something. Well, now we see school programs starting to develop, and we see sheltered workshops. And I don't know if you're familiar with sheltered workshops, but those are employment programs for people with disabilities where they go to a center, and usually that center has contracts with companies to do things. It could be like, let's say they might have a contract these days with Hobby Lobby to package Easter grass or to package, little floral stuff, whatever. It might be those kinds of contracts. And so folks go there and work and make some money. Now, the tricky thing about sheltered workshops is, and if you, I don't know if you plan to become an administrator, or you may not plan it, but maybe you'll end up as an administrator in an ICFIID, and so you might have a sheltered employment program attached to that facility. And right now they operate under a Department of Labor. It's kind of a waiver because like you and I, we have a right to minimum wage. Any job you go to has to pay at least minimum wage. But through a Department of Labor waiver, they don't have to. And so people get paid at the rate at which they perform. So for example, and the way you calculate that, I think it's kind of interesting, is you take, let's say they have a contract to package Easter grass, like I said before. You take 3 people who do not have a disability and you have them practice packaging Easter grass for a little bit. Then you time them for like an hour doing it. And if they can each, I'll keep the math simple for myself, if nothing else. Let's say they can package 10 in an hour, okay, that person. And so you take, and then figure out what would be the prevailing wage for packaging Easter grass. Let's say it's $10 an hour, So at $10 an hour, they're doing 10 packages of Easter grass, okay. Then you have the folks with disabilities do it. Practice a little bit and then do it for an hour. So if Freddie he does 3 in an hour because, he's got a lot of problems with his hands and he doesn't package very well. Boyd can do 7, okay? So Boyd's gonna make like a percentage, which would be like $7 an hour. Freddie's gonna make like $3 an hour, kind of a thing, okay? And a lot of the work, that was probably a better example of piece rate. There's hourly work, but those kinds of things they would consider piece rate. And really what they would do is they would say, okay, 10 in an hour at $10 an hour is $1 a piece. So that's why he gets $3 for his 3, he gets $7 for his 7. And that's how they pay people. And it's considered a sub minimum wage based on how they perform. And as they perform better, if they get better at it, or we help Freddie in some way, like we have a device that he can put his bags on and fill. And now he's doing 5 in an hour. His wage goes up, because he's doing 2 more, he gets $5 an hour for that. Okay, so pretty good concept initially. Sometimes tricky to really do it right, to really be fair. You can really cheat that person with disabilities, even without trying to. If you haven't done that time study correctly to begin with, and you're not paying your workers quite right, then he's not making that much. So that's how that works. Just so you know. Now you know how sheltered
Pretty labor intensive for the staff. If you really want to be fine, it's time study regularly.
Yes, you do.
Like us, we have so many that, it just pretty much somebody.
Yeah,
pulls
yeah.
it out.
And some jobs are real tricky because if it's like almost assembly line stuff and both of you guys are needed to complete a product, I have to pay you for the piece of it that you're doing. Like let's say the bags come in a roll and have to be taken apart. That's what you're doing. And your job is actually filling them. And then this guy's job is sealing them. Then you have to be paying for your part of the job. And it can get tricky to pay correctly. Yeah. So all those things being considered. And right now there's a lot of talk about doing away with sub-minimum wages and just getting people to minimum wages. I don't know where that will go. So.
Sounds like our systems need to be reversed.
That's what I'm thinking, do that with them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because we know, we all have had some employees working with us that deserve just some minimum wage. Okay, then in 1981, here in Oklahoma, the group home program was established by former First Lady Donna Nye. And that became the first community residential option for people with intellectual disabilities. The first 10 group homes were very successful, so they continued the program. In a few years, there were more than 60 group homes across the state. Most of them, they had between 6 and 12 residents. So the ones that had, particularly 12, still, they kind of had the feel of more of a facility than a home, than a group home. And the group homes are under, or were, under the health department. And so they had to be licensed. And so that kind of added to the feel of being a facility rather than a home, because they had to have, exit signs over the doors and various things like that that we don't have in our homes. But it was because of the size of them. That's where they were put. Now, our division licenses group homes. And you don't have to have that stuff anymore, which is nice. Okay, so about that same time, group homes were developed, all of that. And in 1981, around that same time, some families with children at the Hisson Memorial Center formed a group and called themselves Homeward Bound, Inc. And in 1984, and they formed it because they weren't happy with the conditions there. In 1984, conditions fell below the federal standards and Medicaid threatened to be cut off. So they were having their Title 19 surveys. They weren't passing those inspections. And one of the reasons was when Hisson was built, it was built during the time of Lloyd E. Rader, who was a very powerful man over the Department of Human Services, had a lot of pull, a lot of power in Oklahoma. So, nobody was going to go up against him. Hisson was considered state of the art at the time. But then over time it would go downhill, but nobody was questioning it or doing anything about it until finally, it just really went under. So we've got all those problems starting to happen at Hisson, and those families forming Homeward Bound and starting to take a look at it and starting to talk to the news and reporters about the problems they were having with, for their children at the facility. Then at around the same time, the federal Medicaid program began developing ways that states could use Medicaid money for community programs. At that time, all the federal money was going into the ICF IIDs. Group homes were being developed just by agencies as nonprofits. They weren't getting any federal money. If anything, they got some state money, or else they operated on their own. But the feds started looking at ways that we're channeling all of this money into facilities, and we've got things like the Education Act for kids, all these community things starting. How do we channel that money into community programs as well? And so at that time, they started what we call waiver programs, because it waived the requirement that you be in an institution. You could be in the community, but if you had a need for that level of support, then that federal money could be channeled to support you. And here in Oklahoma, in 1985, our community waiver program started. So at that time, I was working at the Pauls Valley State School, but I moved over in 1985 to the community program myself. I was a psych tech down there, psychological technician, and I went to the community program in Pauls Valley to become the psychologist for that area of the state. And at that time, there were approximately 1,500 people living in the 3 state-operated facilities in Enid, Pauls Valley, and Broken Arrow. Now, I mentioned Homeward Bound, that group of parents. They filed a federal class action lawsuit in 1985. And it's known nationally as one of the longest running lawsuits of its type. And a result of that lawsuit was that Hisson was required to close. And at that time, all 420 residents had to be moved into community settings. There were 2 classes of people from that lawsuit. There were what were called focus class members and balance class members. And the focus class members were the ones still living at HISM at the time the lawsuit ended. And balance class members were people who had moved out of the facility for whatever reason. Some of them were living in nursing homes. Some of them might have gone back home. They were considered balance of class. So even though there were 420 residents at HISM, there were several hundred more that were pulled in because they were balance class members. And part of the reason the balance class members, quite a few of them had gone to nursing homes. There was a big push to deinstitutionalize people back in the late 80s. And our idea of deinstitutionalization was just simply move. It didn't matter where they went. They moved out of the institution. Well, if they moved into another nursing facility, I don't know if that's deinstitutionalization, but I remember quite a few people going to nursing facilities. Some of them needed nursing facility of care, but a lot of them did not that actually moved out. And so then 1994 was the deadline for moving all of the residents out and closing that facility. They did it. We did it. I say we did it on time and actually a little bit ahead of schedule. Hooray for us. Then in 1992, a 52-bed facility, the Robert M. Greer Center, was built in Enid. It's on the campus of the Enid State School, or Northern Oklahoma Resource Center. And it was intended to treat individuals who had a dual diagnosis of some type of mental illness and intellectual disability. And I remember when it was first built, we didn't ever do this, thank goodness, but I went to a conference where they were talking about it. And the person who was going to be directing it was talking about, all the different new and innovative treatment models. And one of those treatment models was called CIBUS. And CIBUS is an electric shock device. Because I tried it. They said, anybody want to try it? Sure. They put it on the lowest setting. I still remember. It's like, ooh. And, so if somebody was hitting themselves or biting themselves or whatever, you shock them at the same time. And that, was aversion therapy and would make them want to stop so they wouldn't get shocked again. So innovative of us, I'm telling you. In November of 2012, it was voted to close the Northern and Southern Oklahoma Resource Centers. So basically, 10 years ago, it would be 10 years this year. And the reason was those facilities, built in 1909, and around that time, they were starting to fall apart, and it was becoming very expensive to keep them up and to meet the new facility codes and life safety codes and all of those kinds of things. It's going to cost a ton of money. So it was decided to close those facilities and move people into the community. And at the time we started doing this, there were only about, but compared to 500 each, there were only about 150 people living in each of those facilities at that time. And of course, HISM had already closed. So we'd gone from 1,500 people down to around 350, 400 people total. There's the White House. Northern Oklahoma Resource Center closed in 2014. And then in 2015, the Southern Oklahoma Resource Center closed in Falls Valley. The Greer Center is still open on the campus, and they make use of a couple of the other buildings. And we still make use of it as it's our intention for it to be short term. When people are at such high risk to themselves and others, if they go there, it's intended to be a very short stay and then come back out. Now, of course, today there continue to be over 100 smaller intermediate care facilities in Oklahoma. Is anybody familiar with some of them? There's you are? Okay, yeah, McCall's, Center of Family Love. There's just quite a few scattered around the state. And I know McCall's operates some small ones, more than one, and they're smaller. They're not 100-bed. Majority of them, I think, are they 16?
Varying sizes depending on what the purpose is, if they're maybe fragile homes or whatever. And then on the campus, we have, it's actually divided into 12, what they consider 12 different facilities, but it's all in campus there. We have 148 residents on campus.
Okay. And McCall's also contracts with us to do community services. They have some group homes, that kind of thing as well. There are new federal regulations now require settings to be in the community and services received like everyone else for our community programs. And that's what that other document is, which we're going to look at the end of this, just so you can kind of compare. So now you've got kind of an idea of where everything has gone nationally, you know, where Oklahoma has gone, what was happening nationally at that level. Now I'm going to talk more about our community-based services so that you're aware of those. Here's the mission of our division. Help families and folks with disabilities. And you'll hear me as I speak. I think you probably have heard enough stuff, maybe through the news or whatever, that we don't use the term mental retardation anymore. We use intellectual disability. And you won't catch me, I hope, calling somebody disabled or, you know, I try to use what they call person first language. And I don't know if anybody's heard of that, but that's where you mention the person first and you only mention the disability if you have to. Like, I'm going to say, you know, we work with X number of individuals. I don't have to say X number of individuals with disabilities. Or if I'm talking about a young lady with disabilities, that's the way I'm going to put it. I'm not going to say, I work with this disabled lady. Avoiding terms like tube feeders, runners, all kinds of terms that we used to use. Those kinds of things. Just, you know, just increasing our respect. And folks with disabilities who have formed their own advocacy groups, they talk about that kind of thing too. I heard a term the other day, what was it? Well, sometimes I've heard terms like differently abled, you know, individuals who are differently abled. I can't remember what the other one was that I heard just the other day that I thought was kind of a neat one folks are coming up with. Anyway, I just throw that in as a side, extra points. The community services program is funded in 3 ways. Through federal dollars, again, like I mentioned before, a waiver of those funds that would go into institutional services are channeled to the community program. And we get, it changes periodically, but I'll say roughly 70% federal dollars, 30% state dollars, which is a great return, because that means for every 30 cents that the state spends on an individual, they can pull down 70 cents federally. So, you know, you can maximize that and get a lot more for your state dollars. We have some programs that are state dollar only funded. Those are smaller programs. Private pay, not so much anymore, really. Not very many people pay for things private pay. So as of last year, the last number that I got my hands on, we were serving more than 8,300 individuals in our programs, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And at the current time on our wait list, we have approximately 5,800 people. And we're working applications back to 2009. So that's roughly 13 years. A lot of folks wanting and needing services. And now we've been in the news some, but for the waiting list issues, we have hired a firm to do evaluations of everybody on the wait list and determine kind of what their real needs are. And we've done an analysis of the people we currently serve. So we kind of, you know, we have an idea of what somebody who has that particular need, what does that cost? Or that particular level of care. And so it's helping us to put dollar amounts together to take to the legislature to say, to serve all 5,800 people is going to take $5 million, whatever, whatever it would be, to hopefully eliminate our wait list. And as we work the wait list, we find some people have passed away or moved out of state or don't need our services anymore. But every month, I'm not sure what it is now, but we get applications every single month. So it's always been difficult. You start working, you get a little money from the legislature, start working the applications, you pull 200 people off the wait list, but you've added 200 more in the next, 3 or 4 months or something. So it's just always been a moving target. Now, the community programs that we offer are waiver services, family support assistance program, group homes, sheltered workshops, and center-based services. And I say we contract with agencies who do this work. Community integrated employment, assisted living. Now, the community waiver programs, and this again gets back to the waiving of the federal funds. We had to write what we call a waiver, and a whole long document about the services we'll provide under that waiver. We've got, and Oklahoma operates 4 community-based waivers. And they each include different variety of services for both children and adults. We don't provide as many services for children because children have a lot of other funding streams to get things done. Now, our community waiver program, we use a person-centered planning approach. I don't know if you've heard about that because it kind of started in the disability field, but it has application for anybody. I mean, it can have application for you and me. If you've ever set goals, New Year's goals or any kind of goals, financial goals for yourself or whatever, you've kind of done a person-centered planning process. And that involves finding out what the person wants. It used to be a team of us, and I don't know, you've been involved probably on teams, but it used to be that we would sit down as a team and we would decide, what Anetta, if you're the individual that's receiving supports, we're all talking about what you need, and I'm the PT and I've evaluated you. You need range of motion exercises and this, that, and the other thing, or I'm the psychologist and you need a behavior support plan, and all this good kind of stuff. But we never asked her, what do you need? What do you want? It should be the first question we ask. And that should drive the rest of our services. What's important to you? And if I asked you, for real, I'm asking you, what is what's important to you?
Me, a lot of things, but
Yeah.
can I use a client as an example?
Yeah, you can.
So I'm with Home Hope.
Okay, all right.
So one of the houses that we have was Thompson House, where the RSL, and we had a young lady come in with a wheelchair. And what you're saying is absolutely correct. No one ever asked her, what is important to you? And with her, it is all about activities. If there's no activities going on, she throws herself out of her chair because she needs something to be doing. So she had come to visit the house pre-COVID and was made aware that all these various activities were on. So at the time that she came, it was right in the middle of COVID and nothing. So we had this long string of time where she was just constantly throwing herself out of her chair. And finally, the Q asked her, what is important to you? She said, activities. And no one thought to ever ask her that question before she came. So now that we understand her thing is activities, up with activities for little things we're like bingo, as long as somebody else is buying the prizes. Who likes
I feel the same way.
Yeah. So I can definitely relate to that. Of sometimes we have to ask them, what is important to you?
Yeah.
What do you need? as opposed to us just deciding this is what.
Because if we decide it's all gonna be therapies and follow your schedule, and be sure your bed's made every day and what have you.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly, because I've been there too. That's a real good example. Yeah, because when you start basing your plan around what's important to people, you see a lot of problems and things disappear. Because what people communicate to us a lot that have disabilities, if they're not able to speak aloud, they communicate through their behavior, through their actions. And so, and what they're maybe communicating is, I don't feel good, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I don't want to do this, I hate this job, I don't like sharing a room with Susie, whatever, kinds of things that they're telling us. And when you base it on what's important to the person, for example, instead of just saying, Annetta needs PT range of motion activities, if I say, what kinds of activities do you want to do that you can't currently do? And if she tells me, let's say, take bingo as an example, but if she's got a lot of issues with her hands, all that kind of stuff, can we help her with that? Can we come up with adaptations for her to put the pieces or to mark the bingo cards or whatever it is we're doing to increase her independence in that, her enjoyment of that, as an example, instead of just a range of motion program or something else, or fine motor skills exercises that have no meaning to her, we could tie them into activities that do have meaning to her in that way. So that's important, and building off of strengths as well. If somebody really, I always think of the guy, and if you work in any kind of facility, you've probably had this guy or girl who takes things apart, toilets, sinks, whatever. Not a great thing, but can that be a strength? Are there jobs, for example, that require taking things apart? Yeah, there are, or at least, it may be part of a job. Let's say working on engines, taking stuff apart. Yeah, can we get him involved in that and put, have him be working for good instead of evil, kind of thing. So examining strengths and look at people differently, in a different way. He's not a problem, he's got a real strength in this area, different way of looking at it. And like your young lady, she's not a problem by throwing herself out of her chair. She's a great communicator. Now, in our community programs, we have case managers who work for DHS. And they're like the QMRPs or QI, yeah, so that's the old term. It's hard for me to lose that because that's what I was. Qualified intellectual disability professional, QIDPs. They, coordinate services for the person, write up the plan that the team agrees on, all of that kind of stuff. And we have the same we have that model in the community as well. At its core, that team consists of the individual, his or her legal guardian or advocate, if there is one, and the case manager, because they're the ones that should make the decisions on what services are needed or used. And and through the community waiver, but we have we have all basic therapy, speech therapy, PT, OT, all of that kind of stuff. We have different residential options, living situations for people. If they want to continue living in their own home with their family, we can put staff in there to provide some support. For example, so that the parents can work or whatever. We also have out-of-home residential options where like 3 people may live together in a typical house, typical 3-bedroom house. Then we have the in-home supports waivers. We have 2 of these, one for children and one for adults. And they are capitated waivers. The community waiver I was just talking about does not have a cap. So if you've got a ton of medical issues and you need nursing support and various other things, you might have, your plan could run up to $200,000 or something. it'd be whatever you need. But in the in-home supports waivers, there's a cap on that money. This is for people, only for people who are living in their own homes and have, just a moderate level of need. That's where, this is basically where anybody coming into our programs would start, because we want to support people continuing to live in their homes if they can. And then they move to the community waiver only if their needs can't be met here. For example, their parents are very elderly and are no longer able to take care of them, and they can't live on their own with supports, so they might move into the community waiver as an example. We have a lot of the same services that we have in our community waiver available. They get case management, those kinds of things. But you can see what the caps are for children. The cap is about, $15,000. And again, that's because children have access to a lot of other funding sources. There's a program called EPSDT, Early Periodic Screening Development, I can't remember. But anyway, that's a federal program, and children are required to access that program first before ours. Then adults get more, get about 23,000. And so that adult and or his family have to make some decisions about what services they want. If you've got 23,000, where do you want to put it? Is it toward employment, that individual working? Is it towards having staff come in the home to assist? Is it towards supplies, maybe incontinence supplies, maybe a wheelchair, maybe a adapting a vehicle, those kinds of things. There it is, early and periodic screening, diagnosis, and treatment. I'm sure y'all will remember that. I can't, so. Then we have our Family Support Assistance Program, and this is the waiver programs are federal. So that's the mix of federal and state dollars that I talked about before. The Family Support Program is all state dollars, and that's just a small payment to families to use however they want. And if they participate in this program, they do not participate in the waiver program. But some families, that's all they need. A little bit of extra money to afford Johnny's formula or incontinence supplies or something like that. And the payments vary a little bit if they've got more than one family member with a disability. First, we talked about group homes, and our group homes, they're kind of a mix in terms of funding. Some have federal funding coming into them. Some are still totally state funded. And if they are, if they do get the federal money, then those beds, so to speak, fall under our waiver programs. Most of our group homes are for adults. Most of them are 4 to 6 people. I don't even know if we have a 12-person one anymore because they've been downsizing. I'm not sure. But most of them are adults. They don't need very much support. So there may just be one staff available 24 hours to assist. We do have a couple of homes in the state that we share with child welfare, for example, where we're serving some children, some adolescents who have intellectual disabilities. And especially when child welfare is not able to find a foster home for those kids. Sheltered workshops, which we do still have, which we contract with. Center-based services. We talked about those, following Department of Labor standards. Community integrated program, a program that provides placement, job training. That's where we have like job coaches, and we have individuals who work out in regular community jobs with the assistance of a job coach. They may work for, they may work at Tinker, they may work at Pizza Hut, they may work all kinds of places. But those services are delivered in integrated settings, whereas sheltered workshops are segregated settings. Although some workshops do have some contracts to do and will send like janitorial crews. Sometimes they'll have a contract to do janitorial, let's say for this building. So they have the janitorial crew coming in. So there's some level of integration there. Then assisted living is another, it's a small program that we have. This is provided to individuals who really are pretty capable, who live in their own apartments, their own homes. They just need a little bit of assistance, like helping them make sure they're paying their bills, managing their money right, an occasional ride someplace, those kinds of things. Really require minimal supports. We have more than 120 contractors, a couple of them in the room. We have a contract with Home of Hope. We have a contract with McCall's to provide some of our community services. We have contracts with therapists, with certain transportation systems, with different vendors for adaptive equipment and things. So that's the end of that part of the presentation. So you have some idea about the community services programs. I went ahead, I didn't take a break because I thought, I know how long this is going to take. We'll be out early. So then I wanted to talk a little bit about this other handout. Did he bring in some extras? Yes.
Light them up there, right?
I didn't see that. Huh? That's all right. Is anybody else who needs one? Anybody? It's actually being recorded. That's okay. Anyway, I wanted to share this, even though, it doesn't, what I think is it's a good measure if you are going to be working as an administrator or whatever, or working in an ICFIID. These are still things to try to work toward, because historically, those facilities they're not integrated. They're often, outside of town, outside of communities, because they're congregate living facilities with larger numbers of people. It's harder, it's obvious when they're coming to town. Let me put it that way. When we used to put people on a bus, on a big van, and take them shopping at the Falls Valley State School, there were 15 people, 15 passenger bus, and you take people into town to go shopping. It's kind of obvious there's a group of people. It's difficult to integrate well in those facilities, but I think that's a goal. It continues to be a goal to work towards. So I wanted to share these things with you because all of our community programs have to meet these standards. These are new, I say new, within the past couple of years, they're new Medicaid standards that we have to meet. And some of the things, and some states and a few of our locations have trouble meeting this. That people live, work, and do things in a neighborhood, which includes people without disabilities. Again, that's a difficult one for a facility, but how then, that's where that facility's got to think creatively. How do we kind of make that happen? Sometimes it might be a reverse integration kind of model where if we've got employment, are there products that we sell and we can have a store that the community comes to and purchases things from the individuals, and the individuals work that store. So there's, that's a kind of a reverse integration, bringing in people without disabilities as an example. Or, yeah.
A great program at that sensible spending store.
Uh-huh.
Because in Bonita, there's no Goodwill store or secondhand store like that. So Home of Hope has a sensible spending store where the public are actually coming in
Okay,
and
yeah.
buying the products. That's been really successful.
Good, yeah, exactly. And so that's, that may be one of the things you do to try to increase that involvement in the neighborhood and to be known and to meet, that way they're interacting, they're meeting people without disabilities, hopefully developing relationships with people without disabilities. Are they able to shop where they want, go out with family and friends? Used to be at the state school, everything was kind of provided. they buy up these supplies of underwear and shirts and things, put labels on them, and when somebody ran out of underwear, you just go over to the supply and get more underwear for that person. And I can remember one time there was a young fella in Pauls Valley, and we got a call at our office because he had a disability and he couldn't speak, and nobody knew where does he belong. So another girl and I went out there to see him, and one of the first things we did was look at the back of his shirt. It's kind of unfortunate, but does he have a tag? That would tell us he came from the Pauls Valley State School. All your clothes are tagged. My clothes aren't tagged, but but you have to do some of those things in a facility to keep track of whose stuff is whose. But can people go and shop where they want? Do they have, the ability, if I want to go to Walmart, she wants to go to Target, she wants to go somewhere else, do we have, how do we make that happen so that we're honoring people's preferences? Going out with family and friends, having access to personal spending money, go to fun places of their choice. Do they have friends who live in their neighborhood? Be part of making their community better. Getting involved in the community, and that's another thing. There are lots of opportunities to get involved. They'll have those, I don't know, what do you call them, like Green Day or something, where they encourage people to come out and they'll assign you an area to pick up trash, beautify the parks, or plant stuff around the grade school or whatever. Can the folks at your facility, could they get involved in that? That would be a great way to get involved in the community. So now, especially for our community programs, do individuals decide where they want to live, who they want to live with? That's even tricky for us. Because if we've got a home that supports 3 people and one person moves out, it becomes more expensive for us with that same level of staffing to support 2 people. So we need to find a 3rd person. And we do try to, we try to accommodate. We have that another person come and visit. Do they like this home and all that kind of stuff? But we have to think about money as well as accommodating people's preferences. And if they pick a different agency to provide their supports, do they have to move from their home? That's a tricky thing for us as well, because let's say Home of Hope operates this home for these 3 individuals, and you've got somebody in that home who, whatever reason, doesn't want Home of Hope as their provider anymore. They want McCall's. Can they do that? How do we do that? The Home of Hope operates the main home. How do we bring in McCall's? That's very difficult, But those are the kinds of things like you and I do. Maybe our whole family goes to see, Dr. Smith, but somebody in the family decides, oh, I don't want to see Dr. Smith anymore. He makes me uncomfortable. I'm a female. I'd rather go to a female doctor. I can switch. I can go to a female doctor, So it's just thinking about those kinds of things. It's tricky. Individuals have the right to privacy in their home, and that's a Title 19 requirement, even for, in facilities. And what's kind of funny, and I remind people of this who don't have the history, our community services program is actually built on those Title 19 requirements. A lot of folks who don't have that background experience, they'll think, oh, this is so different from facilities. No, it was kind of built off those requirements. There's a lot of good, there are a lot of good requirements in the Title 19 requirements. For example, if you develop a behavior support plan for an individual who's having some kind of challenging behavioral stuff going on, if that plan has anything restrictive in it, it has to go through a Human Rights Committee. It has to go through a Behavior Review Committee and all that to get due process, make sure it's appropriate. We have the same thing in the communities. The facilities have the qualified intellectual disability professional who oversees the person's program. We have case managers that do the same thing. And our case managers actually have to meet those QIDP requirements to be hired. So, you know, there's some, and like I said, the Title 19 regs are still in place, and I don't think they've changed even, really. They probably have a little bit since the 70s. There was a lot of good stuff in those regulations. But the right to privacy, the right to be able to lock the bathroom door, which if you're a parent, that's not just a right, that's a necessity. The right to lock, you know, their bedroom door to keep their possessions safe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Having choice wherever they can. One of our things, and this is kind of an interesting one too, is individuals have the right to have visitors basically at any hour. You know, if you, in your own house, you may not want somebody coming over at midnight, but you could, you know, they could come over at midnight and visit you if you want them to. The same thing should be allowed in our homes. Now, when you live with somebody else, you have to take that into account. You know, to not be too noisy, whatever, not be disturbing your housemates. That's just real life, you know, those kinds of things. Respecting the personal habits and lifestyle of the individual. Does everybody use the same, you know, shampoo and soap because we get that on contract? Or are they able to go shopping and pick out the brand that they like? Those kinds of things. How do we accommodate people who want to watch different TV shows if several live together? Do we have more than one TV? Do we take turns? And if you have to kind of set some boundaries around those things, who sets those boundaries? Is it us, the staff? Or do we sit down with the individuals and say, you guys are going to work this out? You know, what do you think? How do we do this? Well, you guys, we have one TV and everybody wants to watch a different program. What's fair? Or we've, you know, now everybody's got cell phones, but when we used to just have a house phone, you know, how do we divvy that time up for everybody that's fair? You decide, not me, the staff, you decide. What about snacks and food? And do I get to eat whenever I want? Or do I have to get permission to go get a snack? Are things available to me? And are they the things I like to eat? You know, now if you share a home, I don't know about you, but like I've got some Girl Scout cookies in my car because I stopped and picked them up. And if I lived with some of you, I would be hiding my Girl Scout cookies because I want those for just for me, you know. Can people do that? You know, is there a way to secure what they like so that their housemate doesn't eat it? Can people have food in their bedrooms? You know, when you've got a facility, you've got to deal with a lot of health department regulations around some of those things. But, you know, we're serving people in their own homes, and still we have agencies that are like, oh no, they can't have food in their bedrooms. I just ate in my bedroom last night. Why can't they? And, you know, I have been known to just set the dish there and not get it until the next day or something. Because what I always hear is, well, vermin, I'm not sure what a vermin is, but vermin will show up, bugs will show up. It takes a while for those things to happen. You know, I can tell you, if you've had kids, I know when I was a kid, I was told to clean my room, I put the dishes under my bed. You know, it's too much trouble to take it downstairs. I just hide it in the closet or under the bed. It's clean, you know. I found my son, when he was little, he was taking, if he had like a hot dog, I don't know why, maybe he just thought the ends of the hot dog looked weird. I found them behind the couch and they were petrified, you know, but there were no bugs. So we use those kinds of excuses, and instead we should be teaching people, you know, you are welcome to eat in your bedroom. I eat in my bedroom. Just throw your wrappers in the trash, bring your dishes back to the kitchen and rinse them out. Those kinds of things. Teach people those kinds of responsibilities instead of, no, you can't eat in your bedroom. No, you can't eat between meals, or, you know, no, you can't just go in the kitchen and get a snack. We've got to decide that for you. Those kinds of things. Anyway, so that's why I'm sharing some of this with you, because I think these are good things to consider. And if you're a facility, how do you get creative? about doing some of these things. Because our goal for the facilities, as well as our goal for folks that are sharing a home in the community, is how do we make people more independent and achieving more of what they want? So that they value, so they see value in their life, meaning in their life, those kinds of things. One of my favorite stories, I'll kind of end with this. We were learning more about person-centered planning, and we had brought in an expert from New Mexico, and he was we were at a home that, I don't know if 3 ladies shared it, but I know 2 ladies shared this home. And so we were meeting on one of the ladies, and her roommate was at work. And this particular young lady we were meeting about and doing a person-centered plan for used a wheelchair. And at one point, the staff reported that the wheelchair she was using or used regularly, it broke. So they had to send it in to be repaired, and they got out her old chair from when she had lived at Hissam for her to use in the meantime. Well, they didn't even know before in her usual chair, she couldn't move herself. Staff had to push her everywhere she went. When she started using her old Hissam wheelchair, she was moving herself. They didn't even know she could move herself. And the reason was where the wheels were located. The wheels were further forward on her Hissam chair. And so she had enough range of motion that, she could push the wheels like this to move herself forward. But her new, better chair had the wheels further back. So she had no way to get her hands back there to move it. How sad to be a person who could move themselves. And here they are in a chair that they can't. And if she didn't have the ability to speak and tell us that she could move herself. And the funniest thing was the staff who was there and telling us this, and we're all going, what? This is amazing. And the staff said, and the funny thing was, like the first thing she did in that Hissam chair was she rolled herself to the TV and knocked her roommate's picture off the TV. It's like, wonder why she did that. Then, shortly after that, her roommate came home from work and we understood why. That was the most irritating woman you ever saw. She came in the house and she was all over all of us. She was up there looking at her earrings, looking at her necklaces, looking at her glasses, taking your glasses off. It's like, oh my God, so this lady who couldn't move herself out of the way of that obnoxious roommate, what was she telling us when she rolled to the TV and pushed the picture off? I don't like her. I don't want to live with her. Please find me someone else, So she didn't have to say that in words. We figured that out. So that became part of our new plan for her. She was telling us what was important to her. And we got her a different wheelchair too, that she could move herself. So just imagine that poor lady's life. She didn't have a great quality of life, a life she valued before. She was at the mercy of the obnoxious roommate all the time. So anyway, so think about those things. And when you see, and I bring that up since my background is psychology, and that's what I do right now. I don't think I said that. I'm the director of training and the director of psychological supports for our division. Always look at behavioral stuff as communication. It's not necessarily people trying to be mean. Sometimes it's people protecting themselves or out of fear or telling us something they don't like. So how do we, start listening to the behavior, those kinds of things. Does anybody have any questions for me right before lunch, which I'm sure you probably don't? All righty, well, I'm done. So you are free. Was I supposed to be done at 11:30 or 11:30? There we go. 15 extra minutes. Everybody sneak out quietly. No, actually, he's listening to us. So sorry. All right, you guys have a good lunch.
Thank you.